My son-in-law called the hospital and told the nurse to stop trying to reach him. Those were his exact words. Stop trying to reach me. My daughter didn't even pick up. I know because Dr. Okafor told me herself. 2 days after I came out of surgery, when I finally had enough strength to ask why no one had come. She stood at the foot of my bed with that careful face doctors use when they're delivering news they didn't want to deliver. And she said, "We made several attempts to contact your next of kin. Your daughter's number went to voicemail repeatedly. Your son-in-law called back once and asked us to stop contacting him." I remember staring at the ceiling tiles above me, counting the little holes in the pressed foam. There were so many of them, small and perfect and meaningless. And I thought, 68 years. I've been breathing on this earth for 68 years, and it came down to a man telling a nurse to stop calling. Before I tell you the rest, let me know where you're listening from in the comments. I want to know who's out there. The accident happened on a Tuesday. I remember because I had just left my accountant's office over on Maple Street, the one I've been going to for over 20 years, and I was thinking about the quarterly numbers on my rental properties. 3 properties, nothing extravagant. A duplex in Columbus, a small house I rented to a young family in Westerville, and the building where my late wife Patricia's old dress shop used to be, which I'd converted into 2 office suites after she passed. I built that portfolio slowly over 30 years, while I was also working full-time as a project manager for a construction firm. Patricia and I didn't come from money. We came from work. That was the only inheritance we knew how to give. The truck ran a red light at the intersection of 5th and Road. I didn't see it coming. There was a flash of white, a sound like the world tearing in half, and then nothing. I woke up in Glant Medical Center. My left leg was in a brace, 3 ribs cracked, a bruised kidney that had bled enough internally to scare the surgical team. The light in the room was too bright and everything smelled like cleaning solution and plastic tubing. My first thought was Patricia. Not a thought exactly, more like a reflex. Reaching for her the way you reach for a light switch in the dark of a familiar room. Then I remembered she'd been gone for 4 years, and the reaching turned into a different kind of ache. My second thought was my daughter, Vanessa, except that's one of the names I can't use, so let me say it differently. My daughter, my only child, 39 years old, who lived 40 minutes away in Dublin, Ohio with her husband and their 2 kids, my grandchildren who I'd been babysitting every other weekend since they were born. I thought she'd be there. I was certain she'd be there. I was certain she'd be there. She was my daughter. Of course she'd be there. She wasn't. Dr. Okafor, a small woman with reading glasses, she kept pushing up her nose, gave me the news gently, the way you lower something fragile onto a hard surface. She said it like an apology, even though it wasn't her fault. She said my son-in-law had asked them to stop calling. She didn't editorialize. She didn't have to. I heard everything she didn't say in the pause between sentences. I lay there for a long time after she left. The monitor beside me beeped in that steady, indifferent way. Outside the window, Columbus was going on with its day. Buses, traffic, people in a hurry to get somewhere. I looked at the small tray table beside my bed. My wallet. My watch? The one Patricia gave me on our 30th anniversary. A Seiko with a worn leather band. Our initials scratched into the back by the jeweler at the mall because that's what we could afford back then. And it was perfect. And my phone. Screen cracked down the middle from the impact. I asked the nurse to bring me my phone. The screen still worked behind the crack. I had 14 missed calls from Grant Medical. I had a voicemail from Dr. Okafor's office. I had 2 texts from a neighbor asking if I was okay because she'd heard something happened. And I had nothing, not a single call, not a text, not a voicemail from my daughter. I put the phone face down on the tray table and stared at Patricia's watch. I had bought my daughter's house. That's important to understand, not for sympathy, but for context. When she and her husband got married 11 years ago, they couldn't qualify for a mortgage on their own because he had defaulted on a student loan and her credit wasn't strong enough to carry them. I co-signed. Later, when they wanted to refinance and my name was complicating things, I simply paid off the remaining balance, $94,000, and transferred the deed to her outright. Her house, her name, no strings. That's how I was raised to love people. You don't make them feel the weight of what you've given. Her husband, Mitchell, I'll call him Mitchell because that's not on the list, had never liked me. I don't mean he was cold or rude. He was perfectly pleasant at Thanksgiving and birthdays. He just had that particular way some men have of tolerating someone they privately resent. I could see it in how he changed the subject when I talked about the properties, how he went quiet when my daughter and I laughed about something from before him, how he always found a reason to leave the room when Patricia's name came up. I think he resented that my daughter had a father who showed up. His own father had walked out when he was 9. I understand how that shapes a person. I even felt sorry for him for a long time. I stopped feeling sorry on the day Dr. Okafor told me he told a nurse to stop calling. There was a man in the room next to mine. I could hear him through the wall sometimes. A low voice, talking to someone on the phone, laughing quietly. He had visitors every day. I could hear the sound of chairs being pulled up, the murmur of conversation, the particular hush of people sitting with someone they love. I didn't feel sorry for myself exactly, but I noticed the difference the way you notice temperature. On the 4th day, my phone rang, my daughter's name on the cracked screen. I answered. She said, "Dad, I'm so sorry. I just found out. Mitchell never told me you called." And I stopped her right there. I said, "The hospital called 14 times. She went quiet. I said, "Dr. Okafor left voicemails." She said, "I didn't have my phone. I was." And then she stopped herself. I waited. She said, "I know this looks bad." Looks bad. Those 2 words sat in my chest like stones. She said she was coming to see me. I said, "I'd like some time alone first." She said, "Dad, please." I said, "I need to think." She started to cry, and I recognized the sound. It was the same cry she'd used as a teenager when she wanted something, a little too practiced, a little too perfectly timed. Patricia had called it the television cry. We'd laughed about it privately, gently, the way parents do. Now it just made me tired. I told her I'd call her when I was ready, and I hung up. Then I called my attorney. His name is Gerald. Actually, that one is on the list, so I'll call him Frank. Frank Desmond, 64 years old, my college roommate from Ohio State, now a semi-retired estate attorney in Worthington, who still took my calls on the first ring. I had last updated my will 7 years ago, the year after Patricia died, leaving everything equally between my daughter and the 2 grandchildren's education trusts. Frank picked up on the second ring. I told him I was in the hospital. He said, "Lord, what happened?" I told him. Then I told him I needed to talk about the will. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "How bad is it?" I said, "They didn't come, Frank." Another pause. Then, "Tell me what you want to do." That question cracked something open in me. Not in a dramatic way. More like a window that had been painted shut for years, finally giving. For decades, I had made financial decisions around other people's futures. My daughter's college, her wedding, her house, her husband's failed business venture 3 years ago, when I'd quietly given them $60,000 to keep the lights on. Because she asked me to, and I loved her, and that's what you do. I had arranged my life around their comfort and their stability. And the question Frank asked, "Tell me what you want to do," was possibly the first time in years anyone had asked about my wants in relation to my own money. I said I want to change the beneficiary structure entirely. Frank said, "I can be there tomorrow morning with the paperwork." Now here's what you might be wondering, and I want to address it honestly. Some people will say I was acting out of anger, that grief and pain and morphine make people do things they regret. Maybe. I've thought about that, but I'd been feeling this thing for longer than the accident, the slow erosion of it, the way my daughter had pulled back over the years as Mitchell's influence settled around her like concrete, the cancelled Christmases, the grandchildren I saw less and less, the way she'd started calling me only when something was needed. The accident didn't create my decision. It just gave me the clarity I'd been avoiding. Frank came the next morning with a paralegal. We talked for 2 hours. I was still in the hospital bed, leg braced, ribs aching, but my mind was sharp. The morphine had been dialed back and the word was very clear and very still. We restructured everything. The rental properties would go into a charitable remainder trust managed by the Columbus Community Foundation, an organization Patricia had volunteered with for 12 years before she got sick. The proceeds would fund a rotating scholarship for first-generation college students at Ohio State, named after her. The building where her old dress shop used to be. The one I'd carried for sentimental reasons far longer than made financial sense. I donated outright to a women's business incubator program that had reached out to me twice, and I'd kept putting off. My daughter's name stayed in the will. I want to be clear about that. I didn't erase her, but her share, the direct inheritance she had been counting on. And I knew she had been counting on it because she had asked me twice in the past 3 years whether I had a plan for the properties, was substantially reduced, redirected toward the trust and toward a small bequest for each grandchild held in trust until they turned 25, administered by Frank, not by their parents. Frank said, "You're sure?" I said, "Patricia and I built this together. She would have done the same." He nodded. He'd known Patricia since we were all 20 years old and eating bad dining hall food in the same cafeteria. He didn't argue. The day I was discharged, my daughter arrived at the hospital. Mitchell was not with her. She came alone, which surprised me. She looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Not her usual tired, not the tired of a busy mother, but something deeper, something that looked a little like shame. She was wearing the earrings Patricia had given her at her wedding rehearsal dinner. I noticed that. I didn't say anything about it. She sat in the chair by my bed. I was dressed, bag packed, ready to go. She said, "I know what I did. I know what Mitchell did. I'm not going to make excuses." I looked at her for a long time. She looked like her mother. She has always looked like her mother. Same way of holding her shoulders, same slight tilt to her chin when she's being serious. It made everything harder, and it made everything clearer at the same time. I said, "I know you know." She said, "Are you ever going to forgive me?" I said, "I already have, but forgiving you and going back to the way things were aren't the same thing." She started to speak and I held up my hand. I said, "I need you to hear me, not to respond, not to defend yourself. Just hear me. You had a father who showed up every single time, who paid for your education and your house and your husband's business and your children's summer camps and never once made you feel like you owed me. And when I was bleeding in a hospital and the doctors called 14 times, your husband told them to stop and you let him. You let him become the person who speaks for you." I paused. "That's what I need you to think about. Not me, not the money, but what kind of life you're living inside that house I paid for." She was crying, the real kind, this time. Not the television cry. Her shoulders shook and she put her hand over her mouth, and I let her cry because she needed to, and because I was her father and some things don't change. But I didn't take it back. The nurse, a big man named Tony, who had been my favorite on the floor because he was direct and funny and never talked to me like I was fragile, came in and said, "Mr. Patterson, your ride's here." I'd asked Frank to send his assistant to drive me home. I wasn't going to let my daughter drive me. Not yet. I stood up and I picked up my bag and I picked up Patricia's watch from the tray table and I put it on. She was watching me. I walked past her toward the door and then I stopped. I said, "Call me when you had some time to think. Not to apologize. Not to talk about the money. Call me when you want to talk like a daughter and a father." She nodded. She couldn't speak. I walked out. The drive home took 25 minutes. Frank's assistant, a young woman named Patrice, didn't try to make conversation, which I appreciated. I watched Columbus go by outside the window. The trees along Broad Street were starting to go green at the tips. That early April green, the color that always made Patricia stop whatever she was doing and point, like she'd never seen it before and couldn't believe how good it was. I watched it go by, and I let myself feel it. The grief and the relief mixed together in a way I couldn't entirely separate. My house was exactly as I'd left it. Dishes in the drying rack. Patricia's African violet on the kitchen windowsill that I kept alive the way you keep a promise, by showing up every few days whether you felt like it or not. The mail stacked by the door. Everything the same and me completely different. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and I called Frank. He said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I think I'm okay. I think I'm actually okay." He said, "Patricia would be proud of you." I said, "She would have told me to do it sooner." He laughed. He knew her. He knew I was right. I sat there a long time after I hung up. The house was quiet in that particular way. It gets on a weekday afternoon. Not empty, just still. I could hear the African violet doing whatever African violets do, which is nothing you can hear, but you know something is growing. I thought about the scholarship fund. Patricia Josephine Patterson First Generation Scholarship. We had picked the name together, Frank and I, and when Frank read it back to me in the hospital room, I had to turn my face toward the window for a moment. Not from sadness, from something that felt more like rightness, like her name landing somewhere it deserved to be. My daughter called 3 weeks later, a Sunday morning. I was having coffee on the back porch, watching the neighbor's dog investigate something in the grass, with the intense focus only dogs and very young children can manage. She said, "I left him." She said it plainly with no drama, the way you'd say I took the trash out, and I understood that the plainness was where all the weight was. I said, "Are you safe?" She said yes. She said she and the kids were at her friend's house in Clintonville. She said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said, about the house I've been living in." I said, "Okay." She said, "I don't want to ask you for anything. I want you to know that first. I'm not calling about the money or the will or the house. I'm calling because I want to talk to my dad." I sat with that for a moment. The dog next door had found whatever it was looking for, and was now trotting proudly back toward its owner. The morning was bright and a little cool, the way Ohio mornings get in late April, before the humidity settles in for summer. I said, "I'm here." And I meant it. Not like before. Not the open-ended, unconditional, no questions asked here that had let Mitchell fill in whatever he wanted in the blank. A different kind of here. The kind that comes from a man who knows his own worth now, who has put Patricia's name on something that will last longer than any of us, who has stopped arranging his life around other people's comfort at the expense of his own. She talked for a long time. I listened. The coffee went cold in my hand. The morning went on around us. It wasn't fixed. I want to be honest about that, because I don't believe in stories that tie up too clean. It was a beginning, a different kind of beginning than the one I'd imagined for my late years. But beginnings don't ask your permission. They just show up and you decide whether to walk through the door. I walked through it. Patricia's watch is still on my wrist as I write this. The leather band is worn thin near the clasp, and the jeweler told me years ago I should replace it, but I never did. Some things you keep not because they're useful, but because they remind you who you are when you forget. I've thought a lot about what this whole experience taught me, not in the way you think about lessons when they're clean and distant, but in the way you turn something over in your hands, at 3 in the morning when the house is quiet, and you can't pretend anymore. And what I keep coming back to is this. The life I was living before that truck ran the red light wasn't an honest life. It was a generous one, maybe even a loving one. But it wasn't honest. I had been arranging myself around other people's comfort for so long that I'd stopped asking whether any of it was actually good for them. Or for me. Giving my daughter everything she never had to work for wasn't love. I can see that now. It looked like love. It felt like love when I was writing the checks. But what I was really doing was making myself indispensable in a way that required nothing from her. No gratitude, no reciprocity, no growth. I handed Mitchell a house and a father-in-law who never said no, and I was surprised when he treated me like a liability. I shouldn't have been. I had told them both, without meaning to, that I would always be there to absorb whatever they couldn't handle. And when the moment came that required something real from them, just showing up, just answering the phone, they didn't know how to do it. They had never learned. That's not their failure alone. That's mine too. Real integrity, the kind Patricia had in her bones, means being honest even when honesty costs something. It means saying no sometimes. It means saying no sometimes. It means letting people feel the weight of their own choices instead of rushing in to lift it for them. I thought I was being a good father. I was being a comfortable one. Those aren't the same thing. What pulled me through, in that hospital room with the cracked phone screen and Patricia's watch on the tray table, wasn't anger. Anger was there, but it wasn't the thing that held me up. What held me up was something quieter, the memory of who I'd been before I started bending myself into shapes that fit other people's needs. The man who built 3 properties from scratch while working full-time. The man who didn't quit when the business looked like it was going under. That man was still in there. He'd just been very patient. I think that's what Mitchell never understood about me, and what my daughter is only beginning to understand now. Patience isn't the same as weakness. Quiet isn't the same as surrender. And a man who has spent 40 years building something from nothing doesn't stop knowing how to fight just because he got old and started writing checks instead of swinging hammers. Frank named the scholarship after Patricia, and I cried the first time I saw it in print. Not from sadness. From something that felt like her finally getting what she deserved. She poured herself into that community for decades and never asked for recognition. Now her name would be on something that opens doors for kids who remind me of us at 20 broke. Determined, not entirely sure it was going to work out. That's the kind of legacy worth building. Not one that sits in a bank account waiting to fund someone else's resentment. My daughter called again last week. The kids are adjusting. She's looking for work for the first time in years, and she said it with something in her voice I hadn't heard in a long time. Not pride exactly, but the early edge of it, the thing that comes just before you realize you're capable of more than you thought. I recognized it. I felt it myself once, a long time ago, sitting in a small office with a stack of bills and no clear way out. I told her I was proud of her. I meant it. The watch keeps ticking. The African violet is still alive. And most mornings that's enough.